David Chin was supposed to be celebrating his 10th wedding anniversary, but instead, he was sitting in his car outside his own house, staring at text messages on his wife's phone that would destroy his entire world. Can't wait to see you tonight. David's working late again. I love you. Jake, miss you already. When are you going to tell him about us? Rachel, soon, baby. Just need to figure out the finances first. Jake. David felt like he was going to vomit. His wife, Rachel, the woman he'd built his life around, had been having an affair. And not just any affair, based on these messages. It had been going on for over 6 months. David scrolled through more messages, each one like a knife to his heart. Photos of Rachel with a younger man at restaurants David had never been to. Intimate messages about hotels, secret meetings, and plans for a future that didn't include David. The worst part was reading Rachel's complaints about David to her lover. He's always working. Never pays attention to me anymore. David's successful, but he's boring. You make me feel alive again. I married him for security, but I want passion. You give me that. David sat in his Mercedes, hands shaking as he processed the complete destruction of his marriage. He had worked 80-hour weeks for 10 years building his real estate development company, thinking he was creating a beautiful life for Rachel. Instead, he had created the perfect opportunity for her to betray him with another man. David looked up at their beautiful house, the house he had designed and built for Rachel's dream of the perfect family, the house where she was probably waiting for him right now, ready to pretend everything was normal. David made a decision that would change his life forever. He was going to confront Rachel tonight. But what David didn't know was that this betrayal would eventually lead him to the most unexpected alliance of his life with the very man who had helped destroy his marriage. If this story truly touches your heart, let's speak for you. Like this video, subscribe to be part of our journey, and share your feelings in the comments. David walked into his house at 9 p.m., finding Rachel in the kitchen preparing what looked like a romantic dinner for two. "You're early," she said, looking nervous. "I wasn't expecting you for another hour." "Were you expecting someone else?" David asked quietly. Rachel's face went white. "What do you mean?" David placed her phone on the kitchen counter between them. "You left this in your car. It's been buzzing with messages from Jake all evening." Rachel stared at the phone like it was a poisonous snake. "David, I can explain." "Explain what?" "Explain how you've been lying to me for 6 months? Explain how you've been meeting another man in hotels while I was working to support us." Rachel's defenses crumbled immediately. "I didn't mean for it to happen. But it did happen for 6 months." David had rehearsed this confrontation during his drive home, but now that he was here, he felt empty rather than angry. "Who is he?" "His name is Jake Morrison. He's an architect." "How did you meet him?" "At the gym. We started talking, and he was everything you're not." The honesty was brutal, but somehow David appreciated it. "What do you mean?" "He's young, he's attentive, he makes me feel special. He listens to me, David. When's the last time you really listened to me?" David realized Rachel was right about some things. He had been working constantly, assuming that providing financially was the same as being a good husband. "So what happens now?" "I want a divorce." Rachel's directness surprised David. "You've already thought this through. Jake and I are in love. We want to be together." David felt a strange mixture of heartbreak and relief. "Fine. I'll call my lawyer tomorrow." The divorce proceedings were vicious. Rachel's attorney tried to paint David as an absent, workaholic husband who had neglected his wife's emotional needs. David's attorney focused on Rachel's infidelity and deception. In the end, California's no-fault divorce laws meant that Rachel got half of everything David had built, including half the value of their house and half of David's business assets. David lost $12 million in the settlement. But more than the money, David lost his faith in love, trust, and marriage. During the divorce process, David learned more about Jake Morrison. Jake was 28 years old, 6 years younger than Rachel, and 8 years younger than David. He was a talented architect who had been struggling to establish his career. He was handsome, charming, and apparently very good at seducing married women. David hated Jake Morrison more than he'd ever hated anyone in his life. Jake was the man who had stolen his wife and indirectly cost him millions of dollars. David swore he would get revenge on Jake Morrison someday. He just never imagined that revenge would come in the form of a job interview 3 years later. 3 years after his divorce, David had rebuilt his life and his business. The divorce settlement had hurt financially, but David was motivated by anger and determination. He worked harder than ever, expanded into new markets, and grew his real estate development company into one of the most successful firms in California. David Chin Development was now worth $50 million, more than double what it had been worth during his marriage. David had also changed personally. He was harder, more cynical, and completely focused on business success. He dated occasionally, but never seriously. Trust didn't come easily anymore. David's company was preparing to expand into high-end residential projects, which meant he needed to hire an architectural team. His assistant, Maria, brought him a stack of resumes from qualified candidates. There are some really impressive portfolios here, Mr. Chan. David was reviewing the applications when one name jumped out at him: Jake Morrison. David's heart started racing as he opened Jake's portfolio. The work was undeniably impressive. Jake had designed several award-winning residential projects over the past 3 years. His style was modern, elegant, and exactly what David needed for his luxury developments. But more importantly, David realized he had been presented with the perfect opportunity for revenge. Jake was applying for a senior architect position that would put him directly under David's authority. Jake would have no idea who David was. They had never met during the affair, and Rachel had always referred to David only by his first name in her messages. David could hire Jake, make his life miserable, and get the revenge he'd been dreaming about for 3 years. Maria called Jake Morrison and scheduled an interview for tomorrow. He's one of our top candidates. He's exactly what we're looking for. David spent that evening researching Jake's life over the past 3 years. Jake had struggled after Rachel left him. Based on social media and public records, David discovered that Rachel had broken up with Jake about 6 months after David's divorce was finalized. Jake had moved into a small apartment and had been freelancing to make ends meet. He'd never married, never had any serious relationships since Rachel. David felt a twisted satisfaction knowing that Jake had suffered after the affair ended. Now, David was going to make sure Jake suffered a lot more. David prepared for the interview like a general preparing for battle. He was going to destroy Jake Morrison slowly and methodically. But David had no idea that the interview would reveal truths that would change everything he thought he knew about his marriage and the affair. Jake Morrison arrived at David Chin Development at 2 p.m. sharp, carrying his portfolio and looking professional but nervous. David watched through his office window as Jake checked in with Maria at the reception desk. Jake looked older than in the photos David had seen during the divorce investigation. There were lines around his eyes that suggested stress or sadness. His expensive suit was well-tailored, but not new. Jake was clearly trying to look successful, but didn't have unlimited resources. "Mr. Morrison is here," Maria announced through the intercom. "Send him in." Jake walked into David's office with a confident smile and extended his hand. "Mr. Chun, thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm Jake Morrison." David shook Jake's hand and looked directly into the eyes of the man who had destroyed his marriage. Jake showed no recognition at all. "Please, sit down. I've been reviewing your portfolio." "Thank you. I'm really excited about the possibility of working with your company." David decided to test Jake's memory. "Tell me about your background, Jake. Have you always been in architecture?" "Yes, sir. I graduated from USC's architecture program 5 years ago and have been working in residential design ever since." "Any significant personal experiences that influenced your career?" Jake paused, and for a moment David thought he might be remembering Rachel. "Actually, yes. I went through a difficult period about 3 years ago. A relationship ended badly, and I lost focus for a while. But that experience taught me the importance of dedication and professionalism." David was intrigued despite himself. "Tell me about this relationship." "I'd rather not go into details, but I made some poor choices. I got involved with someone I shouldn't have, and it ended up hurting everyone involved, including me." Jake seemed genuinely remorseful, which wasn't what David had expected. "Do you regret these choices?" Every day. I hurt people, including myself. It taught me that integrity is more important than passion. David was confused. This didn't sound like the predatory homewrecker he had imagined. Let me ask you directly, Jake. Have you ever had an affair with a married woman? Jake looked shocked by the question. Mr. Chun, yes, I have. It was the biggest mistake of my life. Tell me about it. Jake seemed to wrestle with whether to be honest. I met a woman at a gym. She told me she was divorced. We started dating, and I fell in love with her. After 6 months, I found out she was still married. David felt his understanding of the situation shifting. She lied to you? Yes. She said she was divorced and that her ex-husband was out of the picture. When I found out the truth, I confronted her about it. And what happened? She admitted she was still married but said she was going to leave her husband for me. She said they were already separated and just waiting to finalize a divorce. David realized that Rachel had lied to Jake just as much as she had lied to him. Did you believe her? I wanted to believe her. I was young and naive and in love. But as time went on, I realized she was using me. How so? She would only see me when her husband was working. She never introduced me to her friends or family. She kept promising to leave him, but always had excuses. Jake continued his story, and David realized he was hearing a completely different version of the affair. When did you realize she wasn't going to leave her husband? When she suddenly broke up with me about 6 months after he filed for divorce. She said she had realized she wanted to work things out with her husband. David was stunned. She went back to her husband? She tried to, but apparently he wouldn't take her back. So she ended up alone, and I ended up feeling like I had destroyed a marriage for nothing. Do you know what happened to her? Last I heard, she was living with some other guy. I think she just uses men until she finds someone better. David realized that Jake had been as much a victim of Rachel's manipulation as David had been. Rachel hadn't left David for Jake. She had been playing both men, lying to both of them, and using both of them for her own selfish purposes. After Jake left the interview, David sat in his office for 2 hours processing what he had learned. Jake Morrison wasn't the villain David had imagined. He was another victim of Rachel's lies and manipulation. Rachel had told Jake that she was divorced when they started their relationship. She had strung Jake along with promises of a future together, while secretly planning to take half of David's assets in the divorce. When Rachel realized that David wasn't going to take her back after the divorce, she had abandoned Jake and moved on to another man. Jake had spent the last 3 years dealing with guilt over his role in destroying a marriage, not knowing that Rachel had been lying to him from the beginning. David found himself in an impossible situation. He had planned to hire Jake and make his life miserable as revenge for the affair. But now David realized that Jake deserved sympathy, not punishment. David called Maria into his office. What did you think of Jake Morrison? He seemed very talented and professional. His portfolio is impressive. Any reservations? None. He seems like exactly what we need for the luxury residential projects. David made a decision that surprised himself. Offer him the job. Excellent choice, Mr. Chun. But Maria, there's something I need to tell you. Jake Morrison and I have a history. David explained the situation to Maria, who was David's most trusted employee and knew about his divorce. So you're hiring the man who had an affair with your ex-wife. I'm hiring a talented architect who was manipulated by my ex-wife just like I was. Are you going to tell him who you are? Not yet. I want to see what kind of person he really is when he's working for me. David decided to give Jake a chance to prove himself without knowing their connection. If Jake turned out to be a good employee and a decent person, David might eventually tell him the truth. If Jake turned out to be the kind of person David had originally thought he was, David could still make his life difficult. Jake accepted the job offer immediately and started work the following Monday. David watched Jake carefully during his first weeks at the company. Jake was professional, hardworking, and talented. He treated support staff with respect, stayed late when projects required extra work, and produced exceptional designs. Jake also seemed genuinely grateful for the opportunity. Mr. Chun, I want you to know how much I appreciate this job, Jake said during his first monthly review. I've been struggling for the past few years, and this position means everything to me. David found himself starting to like Jake despite their history. Jake was nothing like the arrogant homewrecker David had imagined. He was hard-working, humble, and dedicated to doing good work. David began giving Jake increasingly important projects, and Jake exceeded expectations every time. After 3 months, David realized that Jake had become one of his most valuable employees. But David also realized he couldn't continue the deception forever. Jake deserved to know who David was, and David deserved to have an honest conversation about what had happened with Rachel. David decided to tell Jake the truth on a Friday evening when they were both working late on a major project. They were alone in the office, reviewing architectural plans for a $20 million residential development. "Jake, we need to have a conversation." "About the project?" "About Rachel." Jake's face went completely white. "Rachel? How do you know about Rachel?" "Because Rachel Martinez was my wife." Jake stared at David in complete shock. "Your wife?" "Rachel Chun. She went back to using her maiden name after our divorce." Jake stood up from the conference table and started pacing around the room. "Oh my God, you're David. You're Rachel's husband." "Ex-husband?" "Mr. Chun, I don't know what to say. You can start by sitting down so we can have an adult conversation about this." Jake sat down, still looking stunned. "How long have you known?" "I knew who you were when I interviewed you." "And you hired me anyway?" "I hired you because you're talented, and because I realized that we were both victims of the same person." David told Jake everything he had learned about Rachel's lies and manipulations. How she had lied to Jake about being divorced. How she had lied to David about the nature of their relationship. How she had used both men for her own selfish purposes. "Jake, I spent 3 years hating you for destroying my marriage. But after talking to you, I realized that Rachel destroyed our marriage. You were just another victim." Jake was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. "I've spent 3 years feeling guilty about wrecking your marriage." "You didn't wreck my marriage. Rachel did. But I slept with your wife. You slept with a woman who told you she was divorced. That's not the same thing." Jake looked up at David with tears in his eyes. "David, I am so sorry. Even if I didn't know the whole truth, I still participated in something that hurt you. I appreciate that, Jake. But I need you to know that I don't blame you anymore." "Why not?" "Because I've been watching you work for 3 months, and I can see what kind of person you really are. You're not the villain I thought you were." Jake and David talked until midnight, sharing their experiences with Rachel and how her betrayals had affected their lives. David learned that Jake had been devastated when Rachel left him. Jake learned that David had been working constantly because he thought it was what Rachel wanted. Both men realized they had been manipulated by someone who didn't really care about either of them. "What happens now?" Jake asked. "Now we move forward. You're a good employee and a decent person. I'd like to continue working with you. Even knowing our history, especially knowing our history, we understand each other in a way that other people wouldn't." The conversation with Jake changed everything for David. For the first time since his divorce, David felt like he could trust another person. Jake had been honest about his mistakes, genuinely remorseful about the pain he had unintentionally caused, and grateful for David's forgiveness. David decided to promote Jake to lead architect and give him equity in the company. "David, I can't accept this," Jake said when David offered him a partnership. "It doesn't feel right." "It feels right to me. You've earned this position through your work, not because of our personal history." "Are you sure?" "Jake, you're the most talented architect I've ever worked with. More than that, you're someone I can trust completely because we've already been through the worst possible situation together." Jake accepted the partnership, and David Chin Development became Chun and Morrison Architecture. The partnership was incredibly successful. David's business expertise combined with Jake's design talent created a company that dominated the luxury residential market in California. Within 2 years, their company was worth $100 million. But more important than the business success was the friendship that developed between David and Jake. They discovered they had similar interests, values, and life goals. Jake became like a younger brother to David. David helped Jake rebuild his confidence and trust in relationships. Jake helped David overcome his cynicism and open himself up to new possibilities. They often laughed about the irony of their partnership. We should send Rachel a thank you card. Jake joked during one of their business dinners. If she hadn't betrayed both of us, we never would have found each other. Let's not get carried away, David replied, but he was smiling. David also learned what had happened to Rachel after their divorce. She had indeed moved in with another man, a wealthy divorce attorney she had met during the divorce proceedings. When that relationship ended badly, she had moved on to a series of other men, always looking for someone to provide for her financially. According to mutual friends, Rachel was now on her fourth serious relationship since the divorce and was unhappier than ever. She's still looking for someone else to make her happy, David observed. Some people never learn, Jake agreed. David, meanwhile, had learned to be happy with himself first. After 4 years of focusing on business and friendship, David was ready to date seriously again. Jake had also started dating and was in a healthy relationship with a woman who appreciated his honesty and integrity. Both men had grown tremendously from their experiences with Rachel's betrayal. If you made it all the way here, it means this story truly held you. So don't leave without showing some love. Hit like, subscribe to stay with us, and drop a comment. I'll be here, reading every word you share. 5 years after hiring Jake Morrison, David Chin stood at the podium of the California Architecture Award ceremony, accepting the award for Architectural Firm of the Year on behalf of Chin and Morrison Architecture. This award belongs to my partner, Jake Morrison, David said to the audience of hundreds of industry professionals. Jake is not only the most talented architect I know, he's also the best friend I've ever had. Jake joined David on stage, and they held the award together. In the audience, David could see his new girlfriend, Sarah, a kind and honest woman he had met through Jake's girlfriend. He could also see the employees of their company, many of whom had become like family. David's life was fuller and happier than it had ever been, even during his marriage to Rachel. After the ceremony, David and Jake sat at the bar of their hotel, celebrating their success. "Can I tell you something?" Jake said, "Of course. When I first started working for you, I was broken. I felt like a terrible person who had ruined lives. Working with you, earning your trust, becoming your partner, it saved me. You saved yourself, Jake. I just gave you the opportunity. We saved each other." David realized Jake was right. Jake had helped David learn to trust again, to forgive, and to build something positive from a painful experience. David had helped Jake learn that one mistake didn't define him, that redemption was possible, and that he deserved success and happiness. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Rachel had been honest with both of us from the beginning? Jake asked, if Rachel had been honest, she probably would have chosen one of us and broken up with the other properly. And we never would have become partners. Exactly. Her dishonesty caused us both pain, but it also brought us together. David raised his glass. Here's to unlikely partnerships. And to second chances, Jake added. They clinked glasses. Two men who had found brotherhood in the aftermath of betrayal. David Chin thought that hiring his ex-wife's lover would be the perfect revenge. Instead, it became the foundation of the most successful and meaningful partnership of his life. Jake Morrison thought he was applying for just another job. Instead, he found forgiveness, redemption, and a friendship that would last a lifetime. Rachel had tried to use both men for her own selfish purposes. But in the end, her betrayal had brought together two people who could help each other heal and build something beautiful together. Sometimes the person you think is your enemy is actually your greatest ally waiting to be discovered. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best partnerships. And sometimes revenge is best served not cold, but transformed into something much more powerful. Forgiveness, friendship, and shared success. David hired his ex-wife's lover planning to destroy him. Instead, they destroyed the limitations that betrayal had placed on both their lives and built an empire together. Because the best revenge isn't hurting the people who hurt you. It's building a life so successful and joyful that their betrayal becomes irrelevant. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you get to build that life with someone who understands your pain better than anyone else in the world, even if that someone was once your greatest enemy. Especially then,